Well, thank you everybody for being here. We appreciate your attendance. These hybrid meetings are a little weird. I totally understand that, but we'll make do as we go through. But we do appreciate everybody being here today. And again, best of luck to everybody. As was mentioned, this has been an exceptionally unique year, and we appreciate everybody's leadership and commitment to their communities and to the state for sure. With that, we'll go ahead and start the Utah League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors meeting for Monday, August 16th at 9:30 a.m. Cameron, I have on here, first up, staffing updates.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I'm pleased that sitting to my left here is Justin Lee, who effective next week will be our new Director of Government Relations. So Justin, you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Justin Lee. I almost said my previous title out of habit there, but I was the Director of Elections for the state of Utah, working for Lieutenant Governor Henderson, previously for Governor Cox, and served up in Lieutenant Governor's office for 11 years. And I'm really excited to make a change and work here with the league and with all of you. I guess I should say that having worked in Lieutenant Governor's office for a long time, I hope I haven't, but it's possible I've, gone into a fight with one of you at some point, and if so, I apologize. But hopefully, I work for you now, and so if I ever got in a fight and had to dig my heels in somewhere else, know that I'll do the same as I represent the cities and towns. So thanks for having me.
Well, Justin, I'm thrilled to have you as part of the team and very excited for you to officially start next week. And so he is going on vacation with his family this week, but is joining us today for board meeting and LPC before he officially starts next week. We also want to introduce Liam Thrakel. Liam, do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I don't know if the camera goes over that far, but I'm way over here to the side for the people online. Coming in. Okay, awesome. So my name is Liam Thrakel. I'm originally from Minot, North Dakota, and I moved to Utah a couple of years ago. I started at the Division of Air Quality, working for the state doing the rulemaking, and just started here about a month ago, working as a legislative research analyst. And I'm excited to start working on policy and start working for cities and towns, and just excited to be here. So thanks.
Perfect. Well, we're excited to have Liam as well. Liam is our new point person on everything Arpa, and we'll talk about that as the meeting goes along. But prior to hiring Liam, Wayne and I were handling everything Arpa on top of everything else that we were doing. And so when I talk about the Arpa assessment in the executive director's report, we've invested that money into Liam and trying to streamline the services we're providing related to Arpa to the members. So that's the good news. Now the bad news, Wayne Bradshaw, our policy director, is leaving for an opportunity at Rio Tinto. And so Wayne, anything you want to say before you depart?
It has been great working for the league. I enjoyed working for all of the membership as well as with the team here at the league. I'm sad to be going, but also excited for a new opportunity. So I hope I will continue to work with you in my next position.
Perfect. Well, Wayne, thank you for everything that you've contributed here. Wayne was really our first policy director in the current constitution of the role. And we were successful in tax reform, the CARES Act, and a variety of other issues at the legislature, in large part because of Wayne's efforts. So thank you, Wayne. Good luck. And we have posted that position, and Justin will be building his team over the next, hopefully the next few weeks. So Mayor Caldwell, that's everything on the staffing updates.
Okay, thanks, Cameron. Justin and Liam, welcome. And Wayne, thank you for everything that you've done. You've been great, and we've appreciated your hard work and commitment to the league. We know that it's a busy job, and you got a lot on your plate. You've done a great job. We appreciate everything that you've done. Thank you very much. That will bring us to number 2, administrative items. We have review and approval of the minutes. Has anybody reviewed those, and would they be willing to make a motion?
Mayor Caldwell, I'll make a motion, Mr. Clint Smith, to approve the minutes.
Thank you. We have a first. Is there a second?
I'll second. Andy Bierman from Park City.
Thank you very much. First and a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That passes. Up next, we have a call for conflict of interests. Does anybody have anything they need to declare? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. Up next, we have number 3, Utah League of Cities and Towns Board and Commission reports and appointments. Abby.
Well, Mayor Caldwell, I'll actually do this one really briefly.
Okay.
Abby's done a great job staying on top of the 40+ appointments that we have. These were the 2 we talked about in June, and we just have quick updates. On the Commission on Housing Affordability, we submitted names to the governor's office several months ago and still waiting for the official sign off from the governor. The 2 names that we submitted were Draper Mayor Troy Walker and Orem Council Member Tom McDonald. We've been told that the governor plans to select Councilmember McDonald. We've talked to folks at DWS and elsewhere. That's the plan. They've even they will be inviting Councilmember McDonald to attend the meetings up until the governor makes the final appointment. So that's the delay's been unfortunate, but nevertheless, it looks like that'll be Councilmember McDonald representing us on the Commission on Housing Affordability, along with former Salt Lake Council member Andrew Johnston. On the Outdoor Recreation Committee, this was the other weird setup where we had one official appointment and then a half appointment. We had a joint appointment with UAC, and that's taken a little while to get to consensus with UAC. But we, working with the officers, recommended Bountiful Councilmember Kate Bradshaw as the league appointment. UAC then appointed Tom Fisher, who is the county manager in Summit County, to be the UAC representative. So I had one Wasatch front and one Wasatch back. As a result, we worked on names that would bring the geographic diversity for that 3rd joint spot. And based on recommendations from our cities in Washington County, the league and UAC agreed on Kevin Lewis, who's the director of tourism for Greater Zion, but has worked really closely with the cities and the counties down there. And St. George was comfortable with him. And so he'll be the joint appointment. The Outdoor Recreation or the Outdoor Adventure Commission got started a week or so ago. So we ran all this by the officers in between board meetings so that we could get that up and going. So that's the update on those 2 commissions.
Okay, anybody have any comments?
I'm excited that Kate.
Yeah, we're excited for Kate, and we had quite a few applicants. So that was a difficult decision for the officers, but it's exciting to see that much interest.
Okay, nice
Okay.
work. Thank you very much. That'll bring us to number 4, Executive Director Report. Cam?
Perfect. Okay, I will hustle through this piece so that we can get to the deliberation section. Let me set up now, Mayor Caldwell, what we hope to accomplish over the next hour and 45 minutes. Abby, is there anything in the chat room we need to see? Oh, okay. Oh, got it. That'll be just making sure. I'm going to quickly give you the update from the executive director report. And then we're going to take a few minutes just to make sure all board members are on the same page about all the moving parts within the economic development, housing, and tax discussions, including the research that the league is doing to comply with Senator Bramble's resolution on sales tax. Well, we've dedicated about 40 minutes for you as board members to be able to provide input. We'll give you the context of all the moving pieces, and then we sent a survey to the entire LPC that we need feedback on between now and Thursday so that we can start building some policy proposals that are consistent with the policy direction that you give us. So we'll get to that in a moment. And then we'll have President Niederhauser, former Senate President Niederhauser, come speak about his outreach. He's been the homeless coordinator, the state homeless coordinator now for the last couple of months. He's met with many of your cities individually. We as a league put together a work group on homelessness that met last week. The memo that set the stage for that conversation is within the board packet. And President Niederhauser is coming in part to listen. He wanted me to make that very clear that he wanted to hear from cities of your perspectives on where we're at with addressing homelessness. and also share what he has learned during his listening tour over the last couple of months. There will be legislation in that space in the 2022 session. So those are the two most important things that we have left to do this morning. So I'll quickly run through item number 4. Mike Mendenhall, are you on the call?
Is not.
Okay, so I'll do this for Mike. Mike is running for mayor of Spanish Fork, and he wanted to share with the group the candidate guide that he received, that some of you may have received who are running for re-election from the Libertas Institute, in which there's an 85-page document about here's everything you should think about as you are running for local office. In it, it criticized the League of Cities and Towns and basically said you should not listen to the league. You should make decisions independent of the league. So Mike wanted to bring that up to find out who all had received that. So Nick, if Mike arrives, let me know and I'll give him a moment to bring that up. We wanted just to simply highlight it, knowing that many of you on this call are running for re-election or your successors are running for re-election, that we need to make sure as elected officials that you're reaching out to the new candidates and the people who are going to be serving as mayors and council members after November to make sure that they realize that the league is really you as mayors and council members. It's a network, and that we rely on each other, and the strength of the league is the membership, and we need to work together. So that was the piece on that piece.
Cameron, I have a question with
Go ahead.
that. So in the past, because we're a lot of times lobbying for the same things that Connor is there at the Capitol for, but sometimes on opposite sides, what is the league's relationship with Libertas?
Depends on the issue.
So sometimes they're okay with us, but it sounds like they're
I'd say
actively.
more often than not, we are in legislative battles with them.
Okay.
So there's a heated issue in Ogden right now on public safety. Several of the big bills we fought last year, they supported. We're constantly in public safety issues with them, but there are other issues where we have work to find common ground. So, ultimately, we're bringing it up simply as an FYI that, and it's not just them. There are other groups out there that are also reaching out to candidates. We'll be doing our outreach to candidates now that the primary is over. We'll have our trainings for newly elected mayors and council members. And then Mayor Ramsey, when she becomes president in September, she and I have chatted about doing some receptions for newly electeds, potentially piggybacking on the National League of Cities conference that as of now is scheduled for Salt Lake in November.
So do we reach out prior to the election or only after? Because it seems to me if they're reaching out before.
So here's the complication that we have. We represent current elected officials.
Yes, that's true.
So there are several people on this call right now who are running for re-election. And so we don't want to appear like as a league, we're taking sides in election. Our job is to provide information and training. And so what we do is coordinate with the city as an entity and say, here are the trainings, here are the opportunities. Regardless of who wins, your city should engage in this way. Okay, that was the first piece. The second piece, speaking of the National League of Cities, is I had the opportunity to attend last week in Denver, the National League of Cities State League Directors Retreat. This is bizarre for me to say, as having been the director for 4 years, I'm still the third youngest league director in the country, but I am the third most senior league director in the Western United States because of a slew of retirements and terminations. So that's been interesting for me to navigate, as I'm still often, I'm asked to be both the veteran in the room and the young voice. But certainly that beats the alternative. I highlighted in the memo the key takeaways, but one that I kept bringing up to state league directors was this issue of political capital at the Capitol. Every league, it seems, has the exact same political struggle that we have. Multiple leagues referenced that they are referred to as the League of No. Several leagues, including a couple that border our state, can't even get the governor or legislative leadership to return their calls because they're perceived as the League of No, and because the memberships of their legislatures have really turned anti-city. So for as difficult as it may be for us at our capital, I have a meeting scheduled with Speaker Wilson next week. He returns my calls. The governor returns our calls. So President Adams is a former city council member. So we are comparably in a better position than some of our neighboring states. That said, the arms race that we've talked about here is occurring in other states and multiple state leagues have talked about creating PACs and then felt like legally it just doesn't work. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how to bolster our grassroots advocacy with our members and what's been working well in other states, and what hasn't been working well. The second piece that relates to that is just strategic communications. We communicate a lot with our members, and sometimes we have our members that we're communicating too much. And so I was asking questions of what works and what isn't working, and what are the open rates, and how are people engaging with their members, and we got some really good ideas. And as board members, if you have ideas in this space, feel free to send me an email, because we're having these internal discussions as staff. The third key takeaway was frankly Liam. We were one of the first states to hire a dedicated ARPA staffer. There are several states that are looking to do the same thing. And then the fourth thing is a membership management software that we think can help us try to stay on top of all those moving pieces that we budgeted for this year. So any questions about the key takeaways there from NLC? Okay. Again, if you have thoughts on either the grassroots piece or communication with our members or externally, let us know. That's part of the dialogue Justin and I are having as he builds his team is what additional staff and skill set we want to invest in. Next, we have a quick update on membership dues and the ARPA assessment. On the membership dues front, we always strive for 100% membership. To date, we are currently at 79% of members who have paid. Keep in mind the due date for payments not until September. Last year, we had all but one municipality in the league, West Valley City. I met with them last week, spent 2.5 hours with them talking about their concerns and the strategic direction of the league. And I thought it was a very positive dialogue. So I'm not jumping to any conclusions yet, but we, throughout the session, made a point to stay in close contact with West Valley, and we'll continue having those conversations. And thank you to cities that have reached out to West Valley to engage with them. Interestingly, we've had 3 towns who have contacted us expressing displeasure at the minimum town dues and saying they were considering not participating in the league because of that $500 minimum. Mayor Castleton, I copied you on all of my correspondence back with those towns. Have you heard from any of them since my follow-up emails to them? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So we'll keep following up with those towns, and we're tracking all of the towns because of the minimum dues so that we can follow up specifically with them so we can reach the 100% membership goal. On the ARPA piece, we've received, you can go down, Abby, over $150,000 thus far in the ARPA assessment, which is what enabled us to move quickly to hire Liam. So thank you for those who have decided to contribute. Liam has stayed very busy, and that's still with Wayne and me being involved in ARPA, though we'll be handing more and more of that off to Liam as we proceed. We'll be following up with cities who haven't paid the ARPA assessment just to check in. That's a voluntary assessment, so it's not mandatory, but we'll follow up one more time with cities to see if they're planning to participate or not. We do have the matching grant, the state matching grant application portal, which will open up this week as soon as today. So we're waiting for that final word from GOPB. The rezone matching or the rezone grant will start rulemaking in the next few days, and we'll be involved there. And then the last piece is the Mayor Taylor Service Award. The officers unanimously endorsed a candidate, and we felt like rather than announcing that candidate in an open public meeting here, we would save it for the maximum value and announce it at the annual convention. Speaking of the annual convention, Katie has done a remarkable job proceeding with planning the convention. We hope you'll all register for it the last week in September. Our keynote speaker is working on travel arrangements. He's coming from England. We've actually been in touch with the government of the United Kingdom to make sure that he can travel. But he was the diver who found the kids who were lost in the Thai caves, the caves in Thailand. And, we're hoping it'll still work out for him to come, essentially give the play-by-play of that heroic rescue. Felt like that'd be a very inspiring opportunity for our members after a tough couple of years to hear that story. That's the extent of my executive director report. Is there any questions anybody has?
All right, hearing none. Cam, let's roll into number 5.
Okay, perfect. So that last piece is board.
Cam, did you want to mention board
Yep,
vacancies in
I'm
4?
doing that right now. So
Perfect.
the names highlighted in blue are the ones who are open this year. The ones that are italicized are the ones who our understanding is that they are not running for re-election in November. And so they would be midterm vacancies. Our bylaws are silent on whether or not we can elect someone now to fill that vacancy. But that's our tentative plan, is to essentially have a board member in waiting for if and when the individuals we've highlighted are not running for re-election. Then, of course, if people are on the board and do not win re-election, we'll have interim vacancies there as well.
My name should be in blue as well. I'm not running for re-election.
Right, yep. So Nick, let's put that in blue as well.
Gotcha.
Perfect. And we'll be following up with Marissa Westrini as chair of the nominations committee to work through the process of electing new board members. So again, vacancies or the application process is open through the end of the month. So if you have mayors and council members who you think would be great fits on the league board with all the big issues we have coming up, please nominate them or encourage them to apply. Okay. I'm going to take 5 minutes to set the context for this piece of the conversation on economic development, housing, tax, and transportation. So Abby, and Nick, will you set up that PowerPoint? The big takeaway is this. As staff, we've internally tracked all of the different policy concepts that have arisen in this space since the end of the session. That spreadsheet has 117 policy concepts at this point. So Mayor Caldwell, if you recall, on public safety last year, there were over 80 concepts. Well, we soared past that. Now, a lot of those concepts are simply that. They're pie in the sky ideas that people have brought up. But nevertheless, we, working closely with the staff of Wasatch Front Regional Council, narrowed those policy concepts down. You can go to the next slide. To the survey that we distributed to the LPC last week. What we're looking for from board members and LPC members, there we go. What we're looking for from LPC and board members is to essentially create the sandbox, the policy sandbox for us to operate in, so that then we can start, for lack of a better analogy, start building the sandcastle of different policies. Go back to the, leave it right there. So we as staff can, working with some of the staffs from your city, start building proposals that are within the sandbox, okay? There are 2 major commissions operating right now, and then we have our land use task force where we are negotiating a lot of these concepts. You have the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. You can see that there are 6 people connected with local governments that are involved in the different subgroups, the growth subgroup or the rural subgroup. Then we have the Commission on Housing Affordability, and you can see the 3 city voices on that commission. We have retained Lewis, Young, Robertson, and Birmingham to help provide economic development analysis and strategy. And then we have also partnered with the Gardner Policy Institute on short-term rental research, and we're working on another research project with them around the cost of housing. Next slide. The timing is about to get crazy. Today is highlighted in bold. The commission specifically said we're going to give people the rest of the summer, and then we're going to go pedal to the metal starting in mid-August through the end of the year going into the session. So we are closing our survey this Thursday on August 19th. And over the next 3 months, our objective as staff is to evaluate the different ideas and the policy concepts that you provide input on through the survey, and then start proposing the best ideas for you to consider that then we can take back to the state and state leaders and other stakeholders. Next slide. As a reminder, back at the May board meeting, we had Senator Andrigg and Representative Waldrop come present, and they said they want some real progress this year, but they wanted to do it in a collaborative, they wanted to do a collaborative approach. These were the key framing questions. We've reframed them a little bit, but this is generally what you had endorsed back in May. The policy result in decreased housing prices. Who pays for the impacts of growth? Will it result in smart planning? Then we've highlighted in orange at the bottom what our desired outcome is. Respect the role of cities. Location and infrastructure matter, and we need to balance the needs and quality of life of today's and tomorrow's residents. So that's essentially the mini prism for those 117 different policy concepts that we've now narrowed down to the 30 or 40 or so that are in that survey. Next slide. So here are the prioritized topics that are currently before both commissions. The Unified Economic Opportunity Commission Growth Subgroup met for the first time 3 weeks ago. Representative Mike Schultz is the co-chair, and he said, here are the 3 priorities that he wanted the subgroup to consider. Number 1, should local governments incentivize retail? His argument was that cities are over incentivizing retail at the expense of other types of land use and wanted to revisit incentives. This fits into the governor's stated intent, both on the campaign trail and with the overall Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, to revisit and repurpose state and local incentives. Okay, so this isn't just us in a vacuum, it's part of this overall look at economic development strategy in the state of Utah. Number 2 is what obstacles exist currently to holistic economic planning. And that's a term that this Economic Opportunity Commission would like to see utilized more, economic planning. So we talk about land use planning and transportation planning, but bringing those pieces together with economic planning. What's the role of cities? What's the role of the state? What's the role of school districts when it comes to tax increment financing, for example? And then what are the different challenges that we face depending where you are in the state? Then the third piece overlaps with number 1, and that is the local option sales tax formula and the 50% point of sale, 50% population piece. House leadership in particular would like to see the 50-50 change. We've gotten mixed feedback from the governor's office and Senate leadership, but it really does come back to this question of how do we collectively incentivize housing, property tax being a piece of that. So there are multiple moving pieces here in tax policy, economic development, and land use. Let me hit what's before the Commission on Housing Affordability, and by extension, the Land Use Task Force. The 3 big buckets there are inclusionary zoning. We're getting close to language there that could be consensus language on inclusionary zoning. The second piece overlaps with what's happening at the Economic Opportunity Commission, and that is, how does planning for housing fit into planning for economic development? And that could range from everything from expansion of HTRZs to other types of redevelopment to changes in land use, which some have even suggested eliminating single-family zoning as a land use tool, which we've seen in some states and some jurisdictions around the country. Then the third bucket is building off of SB 34 and the moderate income housing plans that all cities are above a certain size are required to do, and figuring out if we found the right mechanism and how to potentially improve that mechanism, tying that back to the economic planning concept. All of the survey options fit within these categories. Okay. So again, we took it from the 117 down to a more manageable number for that survey. And then we're asking you as board members and LPC members to give us the sandbox of the different concepts within these buckets so that when we can start building proposals that we can bring back. So for example, this is the easy illustration here. housing and transit redevelopment zones, HTRZs. So if you as a policy body come back and say, yes, we think we should consider expanding how HTRZs work. This is a tool that is less than a year old, that currently has not been implemented anywhere, and is statutorily limited to being around front runner stations. But we think it's a very intriguing tool. We're doing the town hall on it tomorrow with those front runner cities to try to bring together the pieces of land use, transportation, housing, and economic development. We had to start somewhere last year, and so we started with HTRZs. So if the survey results come back and there's consensus to look at expanding HTRZs, then we as staff will start workshopping what that expansion could look like. Is it front runner and tracks? Is there a component that could be utilized in rural Utah? Is there changes to the thresholds for housing? Those are all the pieces that we'll work on and then bring back to the league officers, board, LPC, depending on timing, as we build that proposal. Abby, next slide. So again, we seek your direction via the survey on economic planning, the outcomes we're trying to incentivize, moderate income housing plans and the like. One key piece that we have constantly brought up is you can change tax policy, you can change land use policy. At the end of the day, residents are still frustrated by the negative impacts of growth. And until you meet residents where they are and mitigate those negative impacts of growth, it almost doesn't matter what you do policy-wise. And so we bring that up in every meeting, and that has to be a part of the overall strategy. The last slide is the next one, and that is, these are the these are the efforts so far this summer, the partners and research. We will be looking for subgroup volunteers on that rural group so that it doesn't get overshadowed with the larger conversations in the growth subgroup. So board members who represent areas off the Wasatch Front, if you have recommendations for mayors or council members that could work with Mayors Ney and Potter on essentially a small steering committee, we are looking for volunteers. Last slide is the next one, and that is, these are the categories of the questions within that growth survey. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at it. It closes Thursday. I'm going to stop there because my goal is to give you the context and give you a chance to catch your breath, and then take the next few minutes for discussion as board members of thoughts on the survey, clarifying questions on the survey, and anything else you want us to know as staff as we prepare for the next phase of our approach. So Mayor Caldwell.
Questions or thoughts? Emily, I can see your wheel spinning.
Can too.
I just, I have so many thoughts. I just want to share just a rural feeling deep inside of me, that we still don't have public transportation down to southeastern Utah. We really don't have public transportation, you know, like down to, you know, I'm just going to throw out Richfield. And I just keep imagining what it would look like to have rail to like Richfield and Green River, if nothing else. And it's just, I just feel like this housing conversation just continues to be so Wasatch Front centric. And I understand why, but I just think that there's room to expand in rural, or, you know, just beyond the Wasatch Front. That's all that's my scrunchy face.
I think that, this is Julie Fulmer, I think that part of the conversation we need to start having is, how do we incorporate the private sector into our discussions with building rail? When they're quoting prices at 100 million per mile for rail, it's really hard to even get it into areas that are some of the top users of rail in the state. And that connectivity really does make affordable housing so much more affordable. And so if we were wanting to run it through all of these places, or even get it into the lower parts of the state, like Emily's talking about, we need to work with companies. For instance, Stadler Rail just put in transportation at 10,000 or 10 million a mile. And that's a smaller quote than it is to get in bus rapid transit right now. And that, I think that conversation needs to be had, and we need to find out what those roadblocks are for making this more affordable in the state.
And I was just with Congressman John Curtis talking about, you know, what would it take to, for me to just buy a train. I've said this before, just buy a train and put it on the track and drive to Salt Lake here now and then. But just that there's, like, we have rail from Green River, and it's an Amtrak stop, and there's a depot. And when we even think about, you know, connectivity in southeastern Utah, but like our connectivity to all of you on the Wasatch Front, there is lots of space to build homes down here. And there's just lots of opportunity to expand. And I just wonder if, I've been just kind of chewing on, if the state were to really reconsider regional hubs in both either Price and Green River and in Richfield, what that might look like. Regional hubs where we would build them as sort of sub hubs where, you know, Salt Lake City is obviously our capital. You know, what that would look like, what that would look like if we pulled, you know, infrastructure to those two areas. And UDOT did a study. We paid $60,000 to do a study to see what rail travel would look like from Moab to the airport, the Salt Lake City airport. And the conclusion was it was just really expensive. So maybe we should reconsider the bus, but the bus never worked, and it's complicated in the winter. And I wish I was there with all of you, but it's really difficult. Transportation wise, it's a 4-hour drive from Moab to get to Salt Lake. Yeah, I think there's opportunity beyond what's on the list, but so I'm not, you know, saying this is the year, but I just did want to share those thoughts that we can continue to like think broader about how housing and economic development can have a greater reach beyond the Wasatch Front.
Well, and
And Julie, I like what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it serves the Wasatch Front to think bigger, you know, because we can't isolate everything inside of here. Like you're saying, there's places for houses down there. And I agree. I think if we were to think more inclusively, it would serve everyone better.
And I'm not thinking that Moab is the place to put all those new homes, because we're kind of stuffed right now. But like, we don't have a sleepy next door. We've been talking a lot about our housing affordability and how we're suffering in Moab. And it's because we've got underdeveloped communities surrounding us, like Green River as a place where, you know, people that want to work in Moab might live, and Monticello, and yeah, so it opens up a lot of economic opportunity for a lot of us, and provides more sharing.
I appreciate those thoughts, and I would encourage everybody to take the survey. It will give you some more education on what some of the challenges are and what's right in front of us. So some of these might be a decade-long conversation to look at and to plan for, but we certainly respect and appreciate where you're at in Moab. And I've personally seen it, having been a frequent flyer in Moab for a long, long time. So we respect and appreciate that. And these are some good long-term thoughts. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
Yeah, Mayor, you know, I think the immediate focus and what we're going to need to be, I hate to say reacting to, but I'd like to be more proactive, if there's a way to do it, you know, is this idea that we're going to monkey with the 50-50 formula, and, you know, does that make a difference in you know, municipal thinking regarding zoning and what we entitle? And, you know, I mean, we had a discussion about this kind of as officers, that in many respects, the property tax is a bigger driver than the sales tax distribution in terms of our thinking about, you know, what it costs to provide services to multifamily housing, you know, given that they qualify for the exemption. So there's, you know, expense involved in providing service to those developments, but and not just police, fire, but also infrastructure that that is difficult to recapture given the you know, personal exemption. So, you know, it'd be nice to shape that discussion so that it actually reflects something that's real rather than imaginary. Because I think chasing after sales tax, I think most of us get the fact that, you know, the big box store days of the past are actually gone, right? And that is such a much smaller component of our revenue, really, that I'm not sure many of us are motivated by that. And so to monkey with that really may not have any real effect of other than causing problems for bond ratings, you know.
Jeff, I appreciate that, and I completely agree. Cam, do you want to talk about the Bramble sales tax resolution?
Yeah, Mayor Silvestrini set up that segue nicely. Are there any other comments on the survey or the approach before I turn it over to Wayne? Okay, Wayne has been doing the work with Roger to comply with Bramble's resolution, but it's also been very informative as we're working with these two different commissions. Mayor Silvestrini mentioned being reactive versus proactive. Part of the reason we're doing the survey is to try to figure out the areas where we can be more proactive, offering policy proposals so that we're not just reacting to whatever comes from other groups. Wayne's research has been helpful in that. So Wayne, take it away.
Nick, can you bring up the first slide in the PowerPoint? So in 2020, Representative or Senator Bramble ran a resolution asking the league, UAC, and UTA to look at the shift in sales tax at the point of sale. So how is e-commerce going to impact our budgets? Meaning, point of sale used to be at traditional retail locations, but now it's shifting to residential properties because of e-commerce. And so what you see on the left-hand side of this PowerPoint is what it looked like in 2015. So you had the percentage of the point of sales in your community that came from e-commerce. The lowest amount in 2015 was 2% of one city's point of sale came from e-commerce. The largest was 72%. So 72% of the sales in their community came from e-commerce. What you see in red is the state, and it was about 12% in 2015. So fast forward to 2020, obviously e-commerce is growing. So the smallest percentage is about 5%, and the largest percentage is about 90%, and the state came in at about 22%. So what this data is telling us is that obviously e-commerce is having an impact in our communities. Point of sale communities are seeing a smaller growth. So they're the ones kind of above the state, are what I would call our point of sale communities, because they have a larger traditional retail base. But what we also see is that communities that did not have retail locations before are now starting to see point of sale locations because of e-commerce. So what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is basically the averages for the type of community. So towns In 2015, the average about point of sale e-commerce was about just under 30%. But by the time you get to 2020, it's over 40% for towns. And then it of course goes down by the size of the city because there's the potential for those communities to have a larger retail impact in their communities. So back to an earlier point about the change in 50/50, one of the arguments against that is that rural Utah is starting to have a point of sale location. So they're starting to not only just get credit for the population, but they're now getting credit for point of sale. If you move the formula more towards residential, it's going to be rural Utah that was making ground on point of sale. That'll be gone. And again, their growth is slower. And so this is moving an opportunity for sales tax increases in rural Utah. If you move towards residential, it impacts them significantly.
So why would it impact them negatively? Because it seems like it's a positive effect.
Well, so if you take the 50/50 and you take that point of sale, which is at 50%, and say go to 25%, where they're now seeing points of sales in their community.
They'll keep that regardless, right?
Well, they would only get 25% if you change the formula. So they'd only get to keep 25% versus 50% under the current formula. My point is that rural Utah that didn't have points of sale before are now getting them. And if we change the formula, that what they would get 50% of, say you move it to 75-25, they would only get 25% of that. So it will what's growing will diminish in a formula change.
And who wants to change the formula again?
So the Speaker of the House has asked the Utah Taxpayers Association to look at changes to the 50/50 formula to incentivize housing. So that's been one request. And then Cam is serving on a subcommittee of the Economic Opportunity Commission, and the chair, which is Schultz, Representative Schultz, his third priority is exploring changes to 50/50 to incentivize housing. So there's at least two major leaders in the House that are looking at that potential change.
And that affects, or the change in the formula then would benefit the Wasatch Front or larger cities, but all of us who are smaller cities, it would be a negative effect. We have seen a great increase with that point of sale.
Yeah.
We've really enjoyed
Well, the
that little
other
boost.
the other element to this, though, is that the bedroom communities that didn't have points of sale before are now starting to see them. And so the question is, changing the formula now, when you're seeing bedroom communities starting to see points of sale locations, does it make sense? Or are we just going backwards? So,
Well, and to piggyback on this point, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve? If the outcome we're trying to achieve is more housing by changing the formula, Wayne's also doing some analysis about which cities currently have a large amount of point of sale and how their land use patterns overlap with that. And so take Salt Lake City, for example. Salt Lake City is a heavy point of sale community. It also has the highest density of land use of any city in the state. So when you ask the question of like who benefits and who gets hurt, the answer is really it depends on the city, because it's really city by city. Salt Lake City would be one that would get hurt dramatically, even though they have more new housing units and more multifamily new housing units than almost anybody else. So coming back to the question of what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, our hypothesis is changing the 50/50 doesn't get to the outcome they're seeking. All it does is it changes every budget in the state and could have really dramatic impacts on certain communities, particularly your commercial centers, your resort communities, and those that have a lot of influx of visitors to their communities, whether that's a daytime working population or tourists or others.
And can I just add to that, Cam? There's There's this other, it's a three-dimensional topic. This is nothing about taxes is simple and one-dimensional, but there's also the fact that Salt Lake City and a handful of other cities have some of the highest untaxable percentages. We're close to 50% untaxable in Salt Lake City because of all of the state and university and school properties, church properties here. So it is complicated and it hurts us dramatically.
Kim?
Go ahead, Raj.
This is one of the last issues after 40+ years that can still make my blood pressure spike. So I'll try to temper it a little bit, but bear in mind, the league has always taken a position opposed to looking at changing the 50-50 unless there was new money on the table. Because the absence of new money simply means we're robbing from some cities to give to others. This is our money. This is your money. This is not the state's money. That's not a didactic statement. That's the Supreme Court has said that. The 50-50 formula was our formula. We all agreed to it. In fact, it was 40 some odd years ago. Those were the terms. All of you have enacted ordinances. You took the political decision to adopt this formula. I will offer personally, I think there are serious legal questions about whether the current formula can be changed without new money. You can harm people set their budgets on. We'll leave that aside. But absent new money, which no discussion has put that on the table, all we're doing is saying we're declaring some cities winners and some cities losers. Now, what's been shown here with the e-commerce component is the formula is dynamic in terms of the amount of revenue it generates. E-commerce has shifted some of the points of sale, which have now meant certain cities get more. It's a structural shift to a population increase without changing the formula. So they're worried about incentivizing more population. They're going to get that anyway, simply because of the internet. And that's really what they show. Percentages will vary. But I think the point to be emphasized is it's your money. The formula was our formula. And unless they put new money in, all we're playing is the winners and losers.
Well, and the thing that I think is important to keep in mind here too is the whole idea of the reason for wanting to change the formula is thinking that it is somehow incentivizes municipal land use planners to make decisions a certain way. And this shows that that isn't the case. This graph shows that it isn't the case, and it has unintended consequences to change it.
But the real goal is to make it so that housing isn't a loser for a community. Because right now, if you look at your housing, you pretty much lose money on it. Mm-hmm. And to say we're going to change the property tax formula, I have a hard time believing that that's ever going to be possible. I mean, that's going to be a real hard one. And so the other way to do it is this. The third way to do it is maybe through education, because if you can have more dense communities, then it's easier to get them to pay for themselves. But I don't think a lot of cities understand that. And so I think there are other things that can be explored. But again, the goal is to make it so that housing isn't a loser for communities, because if you go to almost any of our city managers and say, do we really want a lot more housing? They'll say, we'll just lose money on it. And we don't want to raise taxes, and so we'll want to get money makers in our communities rather than housing. And that's just the thought.
Yes, that is at least my understanding of what the speaker and what the majority leader is saying. Let's find a way to make it more financially incentivizing cities to do more housing. But one last data point that I'll share is that from 2015 to today, there are about 30 communities that have produced about 70% of the housing units each year. And if you change the 50-50 formula and make it more favorable to residential and away from point of sale, those 30 communities have a net negative loss from 2015 to 2020. So if we want to send more money to those that are producing the housing, a change towards residential does not overall do that for those 30 communities. It actually pulls money away from them. And we see that if we had changed the formula from 2015 to 2020, those housing producing communities would have lost money. And moving forward, we project that they would lose money throughout the process as well. So in the end, I don't think the 50-50 formula change is going to ultimately get to what the speaker or the majority leader wants.
So I have a question for Wayne or Cam, or just sort of, it's a data question, but it seems to me that in the last year or two that the trends are really changing away from building commercial space and more towards residential. I know we've currently have a big project application right now that had a sizable commercial that they've come back to us and asked us to go to residential. And that's for a couple of reasons. One of the big ones being more people are working from their homes. There's less needs for office space. And with the boom of e-commerce, a lot of retail is less viable. So it seems like the trends are going, the market trends, which are really going to dictate this, are going in a different direction, with e-commerce rapidly on the rise and developers not seeing benefit to flipping commercial as quickly. Do we have any data to support this? Because this seems like, obviously Park City is strongly opposed to the change of the 50-50. We'd get clobbered with that, but it seems like it's trying to solve an old problem, not the current trend.
Yeah, so Mayor Bierman, good point. And so I'll end with two more data points. So in 2016, for every commercial permit retail permit that we permitted, we were permitting around 110 residential. So that was in 2016. In 2020, for every retail permit, we were issuing 200 residential permits. So we are producing a lot more housing permits than we are retail permits. And so the question becomes, are we over retailed as a state compared to our population? I looked at the number of retail establishments in a state like Oregon that has no sales tax compared to the state of Utah that we do have sales tax. So for every retail location, the state of Oregon has about 75 residents. In the state of Utah, for every retail location, we have about 70 residents. We're not that far off from a state that has no sales tax. And so you could argue has no incentive to try and over retail or get more retail locations. So, and if the trend continues, we will see retail to residential population. We'll see that number continue to shift.
Our employment in retail is virtually on the national average. We're not any different than anywhere else. I basically say this question: if our goal has been to incentivize retail, we're doing a lousy job of it, because we just haven't got any more retail than any place else.
So Mayor Caldwell, I'm expecting President Niederhauser any minute. There were a couple other items we wanted to get to in this advocacy section. So are there any other final questions on economic development, housing, and sales tax?
I just had a question. So when Roger was talking about the league helped craft the 50-50, so we are opposed to changing that officially?
So we have a league resolution that the membership has endorsed. Now, obviously during the conference, we can change resolutions.
Right.
But that policy resolution calls for preserving the 50-50 unless there's new revenue streams available. And if there is any change to the 50-50, making sure that we have identified all of the potential consequences to changing. So I want to call it a line in the sand, absolutely not, under no conditions. What it says is 50-50 matters to every city. Here are the different reasons why it matters to every city. So any changes need to take into account all these reasons.
Okay.
And that resolution was endorsed by the league membership several years ago.
That's what I was thinking. I just wanted to verify.
Yeah.
Thanks for those updates. Obviously, there's a lot of work yet to be done with this, and there are a lot of unintended consequences that need to be considered and presented to the legislators. So we appreciate your work and diligence on that, Cam.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Please fill out the survey. Talk to your fellow city leaders, because that's going to help us figure out which proposals make sense and which ones are unacceptable, and then we can start bringing specifics back to be more proactive.
The other thing that I think needs to be looked at is a lot of retail is going away, but a lot of it's getting centered on big sources. If you have a Costco, where you have, I mean, Costco's driven out stores in our community. And so a lot of these things are migrating to these super centers. Is there a way you can maybe just look at those super centers to maybe change some things? Because I mean, like I said, we've lost stores to Costco.
So just change the point of sale for the,
I don't know if you just
heavy
change those,
center.
or maybe you put caps on them, or maybe you just look at what, I mean, I don't know that you want to do it. And it just adds a bunch of complexity that probably will do no good, but maybe it's something to think about.
Yeah, and as Cam stated, our resolution says that we're opposed to changes without new revenue. And so we certainly, if the legislature is willing to say, like they did back in the 80s, is that you can increase that point of sale. We up to 1%. That was part of the agreement back when a 50-50 changed. If they allow that increase to happen, we can look at those kind of scenarios about, you know, who gets the money, do we cap it? So I think that's all part of the conversation if there's new revenue. I know we're on a tight timeline, so we just wanted to, Nick, can you go to the next slide? We are starting to put together some working groups through the policy committee. We just want to make you aware of one that we're going to work on is legislation that the league would sponsor to integrate land use planning and water use. So this, what you see on the left, is on the governor's website. This is his initiative to try and deal with water use and the drought in the state of Utah. Two of them impact us. One is the water planning land use integration. The other one is the secondary metering. And so we are going to put together a working group, the H2O Collective, which is a partnership between Prep 60 and the league. We're working on draft legislation. Then we will put together a working group from the policy committee and have them edit it, provide feedback, and then ask LPC to do a final vote. But we think because this is in the governor's initiative, we've talked to multiple legislators that are planning on doing this or want to have some type of land use water integration. We feel it's important that as a league, we take control of that. We come up with the legislation and we shepherd it through the legislative session. I'm happy to answer any questions here.
Well, we're in favor of water conservation, of course, and the drought situation, but as a mountain community that is very susceptible to wildfires, we're asking our residents to adequately water, but be conservative at the same time, because it is a preventative measure for us. So I would hope that that would be taken in consideration in this task force, that some communities that are threatened by other things would need to balance that.
Yes, and right now the draft, really all it does is it asks you in your general plan to look at your current water needs, your future water needs, and is your current use within your zoning and your land use, does that make sense for now and in the future? So it still is allowable for communities to be flexible and build out and do what they need within a community, but it requires you to take a look at it from a planning perspective and look at your water as well. So I know we're short on time and we're moving on to the next agenda, but we'll be putting that working group together. If the board has any feedback, feel free to let me know, but more to come on that. Cam, I'll toss it back to you.
Perfect. Mayor Caldwell, President Niederhauser has now joined us. So once president, always a president, or would you prefer?
Wayne's good.
Wayne, okay.
Not always a president.
So Mayor Caldwell, before I turn it over to him, there were two other quick items. One was our city's work push of telling your story. Justin Lee was going to do that. Justin, can you do it in 30 seconds? And then you'll be making this pitch at LPC as well.
Absolutely, I can do it in 30 seconds. Really, the push with cities work it's a call to action to get cities and towns to reach out to their legislators, create those relationships, and then tell the stories of the issues that are facing you. So when they consider legislation, they're not as we all, which never happens, of course, having unintended consequences. We have fewer and fewer members of the legislature who have some kind of background in local government. So it's important that we make those connections. So we'll be talking more about this, but one of the things that I'm here and our team will be here is to help you make those connections and to tell that story. So there's my 30-second pitch on that one.
Perfect. We'll go into a little more detail at LPC on it, but especially with all of the mayors and council members who are not running for re-election this year, the relationships need for those future mayors and council members needs to be fostered as soon as possible. The other item, Mayor Caldwell, was on Metro Townships. Roger prepared a memo based on his analysis of the league constitution and what that means for the Metro Townships. This is not time sensitive. We thought it might be because we may need a constitutional change. Roger, can you do 30 seconds? Then we'll punt this till September.
Metro townships are municipalities under Utah law. We refer to cities, towns in the Constitution a couple of times, but we actually refer to municipalities about 25 times. As far as I can see, they're eligible for membership just like any other entity. We can work out the timing on that.
Yeah, so that's Roger's analysis of our constitution. So we don't need per Roger's analysis, we don't need a constitutional change in September. There's still a policy discussion about Metro Township membership, but we'll have that policy discussion at another time. So is that Mayor Caldwell, are you ready for me to introduce Wayne?
I am, and I'd just like, before you introduce him, I'd like to say, Wayne, thank you for your time and thank you for taking this dynamic project on. You are in a unique position to help guide us through some really difficult conversations, and we've really appreciated your time and commitment, the listening tour that you've done, and we look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to working with you to address some of this. There's no silver bullet to it. We all understand that. It's a deep impact in a lot of our communities and something that we talk about almost every day. So thank you for being willing to do this.
Thank you, Mayor Caldwell. And again, my apologies for our mix-up on the other day on scheduling. You never want to do that to a mayor because you're so busy. So whatever we need to do, grovel or whatever, sorry.
That's all good. I got to listen to some good sports radio on the way to Salt Lake and back. It was a nice break.
Well, let me quickly introduce Wayne Niederhauser, former Senate President, former Senator from Sandy, Draper, and the town of Alta. When he was Senate President and when he was a member of the legislature, he was always extremely responsive to the concerns of municipalities. He had a tremendous working relationship with us as a league. Didn't even always eye to eye, but he was very responsive, very open to consider the concerns of cities, and was one who was always solution focused. I never had a conversation that didn't start with, what are we trying to solve here? And let's figure that out. Again, even if we were on opposing sides of the issue. In his retirement from the legislature, Governor Cox has tapped him to be the State Homeless Services Coordinator, which probably is the most thankless job in government right now. On behalf of all of us, thank you for your willingness to take on that role. When Wayne was Senate President, as I described in the memo that's in your board packet, he was one of the chief architects behind the scenes on the state's response with Operation Rio Grande and subsequent legislation that impacted cities. He also, like Mayor Caldwell, Mayor Mendenhall, and former St. George Mayor John Pike, served with me on the Gardner Policy Institute's review of the state homelessness approach last summer, which then resulted in House Bill 347, which created the position that he now has. So we spent a considerable amount of time behind the scenes last year working through what was working and what wasn't working to try to create a new framework, and cities will have a vital role to play within that framework. Our homeless subgroup met last week. Several of the people on the board participated in that meeting as we talked about everything from the homeless shelter cities mitigation fund to the potential for overflow facilities above and beyond the current bed capacity that we have in the state, to just the general role of cities within the state, county, and service provider umbrella of addressing homelessness. And that's why we invited Wayne to come listen to the board and discuss this issue with you. Mayor Caldwell will plan on doing this for the rest of the board meeting. We've sent staff up to the trust to get ready, so we'll stay here as long as we can and still make it up to the trust by noon. So with that,
Sounds
Wayne, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. And thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. I'm going to just take a few minutes and talk about what I've learned over the last 90, 120 days since I've been in this position. And some of you have heard this, some of you haven't, but so sorry if it's a repeat. I came into this with a lot of misconceptions, and I've discovered a lot of things that we're doing are probably to some degree misinformed on a state level. House Bill 347 was addressed and passed during the session to create the Office of Homeless Services. And until that time, our office, the office that we have now, was buried in workforce services under housing. And when you look at the federal government, how they administer homeless services on a federal level, it's under HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And the focus has been on housing. And I get that. That's the antithesis of homelessness, is having a home. So our state strategic plan, all the measures that we look at are centered around housing. So before I make the next comment, I want to also, so we don't get caught up into semantics, homelessness is a pretty broad term. And I've bifurcated it into two areas. One, more situational or acute homelessness. And here's just one of many examples of that. I have a home or I'm renting somewhere. We're making our bills, but barely as a family, small family, couple of kids. And then my child gets sick, $8,000 deductible plus co-insurance. And now I've got health bills, people coming after me for those payments. And I end up not being able to pay my rent or make my house payment and foreclosure. And now if I don't have a safety net of family, I'm potentially going to live on the streets or in my car or in some old RV somewhere. Very interesting things happening on the streets. That's this part of more of an acute or situational homelessness. Everything else seems to be functioning pretty well for that family or for that individual. They're working. If they are taking drugs or having a small alcohol problem, it's not affecting at least their entire life. But mostly they probably don't have those issues. And then there's this chronic homelessness, which is defined if you've been homeless for more than a year. And I might define it a little bit different today than what is defined, but for policy reasons, federal government and different people have defined it for purposes of distributing money and so forth. So having said that, now coming back to this situation of this, the strategies, it's little wonder that we're focusing on homes and getting people off the street into homes because that seems to be the problem. But it's not for chronic homeless people. That is not the problem. It is far from the problem. The problem is mental and behavioral health. That is the problem. And if you were going to put the Office of Homeless Services under something, at this point, I would say put it under Health and Human Services so that we can focus on what the real problem is. Because we've taken and we've housed so many people in permanent supportive housing, probably light on the supportive side of things, just because of the cost of case management. And well, I'll talk about case management in a minute, but what we've done over the last little while, especially, is we've taken people who are suffering unbelievable poverty, unbelievable human degradation. I just want to cry when I walk through a homeless camp on the street. It just, you know, to see people willingly, you know, just suffering. We're talking addiction, and yes, addiction is a problem. Everybody I've met on the streets is addicted to something, but it's not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the mental and behavioral health. And until we address that issue on an individual and personal basis, we're going to continue, if we continue to house people, take the poverty they're living on the streets and move it into a 24 by 12 place to live. And that's what we have going on today. Case managers do get out, and case managers are really essential, and some kind of an assessment or a diagnosis of the person's issues with mental and behavioral health. You know, that's where we ought to begin. That's where we ought to then target services, treatment to help that individual become the best they can be, hopefully back living a healthy life. Or under many situations of people living on the street, at least get them into a situation where, you know, they can function to some degree, but realizing that they'll never be close to 100%. Well, 100% is probably not the right verb, because none of us are at 100%, right? But at least back to where, you know, society functions and functions okay. And that's severe mental illness, schizophrenia, and many of those issues. And so I've now realized that we have to really have a hard look, and this will take some time, unfortunately, because we're dealing with policy. And a general session, you know, is once a year for 45 days, is we've got to look at our criminal justice system in light of this conversation today. We have to look at our criminal justice system. We're going to have to look at just policy regarding mental illness. You know, there is a certain level today when somebody is there's a risk to themselves or others, bodily harm, we can detain that person without, you know, against their will. There's another bar above that. I'm thinking we need to look at that as being able to detain somebody to work with them on their mental health. And several states have already passed that. I'm trying to remember what the term is. And it's something disability, more of a severe disability. But these are some of the kind of things I think we need to address as a state in order to really have and to affect what we're doing, spending whatever money we're spending more productively. So that's, and let me just say this, is that just as an experience, I went out with South Salt Lake City Police one night on patrol. And I think that they have figured it out pretty well as far as public safety in South Salt Lake. And you'll say, well, yeah, they get mitigation funds. So we can talk about that also. But they have a unit that is specifically trained to deal with chronic homeless individuals on the street. And I have to say, they did an amazing job. You don't come into the situation, guns blazing, lights on. It's a very soft approach. Hey, no, you can't camp there. And they enforce their no camping ordinance in South Salt Lake. But if they let up for an hour or even 2 hours, that's how long it takes for a tent to come up. And Salt Lake City has experienced that now several times since I've been in this position, as they've been on abatement around the Rio Grande area and other places. I watch email strings that come through who are people, businesses in that area who are complaining, and then they'll say, hey, thanks for cleaning everything up. And then the next day it is, everybody's back and more. And it seems like we're fighting a losing battle. But anyway, back to my situation with South Salt Lake is for 6 hours one night between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. we were constantly busy. I was with an officer there, either in the men's shelter dealing with situations or disrupting people, stopping them from setting up camp. And the first thing that these trained officers did was, hey, you know, you can't camp there, but hey, we'll take you to shelter. No, I'm not going to shelter. This was the number one answer. I'm not going to shelter because there are too many rules. And then a few answers I got, but this was the minority of the answers, is I'm not going to shelter because I don't feel safe there. Now, we've made the shelters here in the Salt Lake area a lot more safe than they were when it was at the Rio Grande, just the way they're built and so forth. But they still feel fear in going to the shelter. That probably has a root cause, or that fear is rooted in their mental illness that they're suffering. So I don't want to go there because I don't feel safe. And when you get someone that with those root problems with mental illness in a confined area with a lot of people around, these anxieties just start to boil in their life. And I get it. I mean, I don't get it, but I understand what they're saying. And so, or my stuff gets stolen. So that kind of lays out at least a little bit of what I discovered. There's a lot more. And let me just go into governance for just a minute, and then let's open up some discussion on this, because I feel like we're going to have to work pretty closely together here as a league and my office and with the legislature and so forth, to, if we're really going to tackle this situation, it's going to be an all hands on deck situation, and everybody's going to need to be working together as collaborative as possible. So our governance today now in the state of Utah is we have the Office of Homeless Services, and I think it's really insightful, and I didn't know how insightful this was until I got into it. But separating that office out is so important at this point, because we're now charged to coordinate this unified effort among some fairly strong fortified silos. You know, we got workforce services that has Medicaid, it's got job services and other services. And over here we got Health and Human Services, which deals with mental illness and behavioral health. And then we've got the criminal justice system and so forth. Once we can start making this office work in those coordinating efforts, focused on what the root problem is, focusing our policies on that, I think we're going to have a much better situation. Do I think we're going to solve a lot of things? To some degree. But when we're faced with what we are dealing with today, it's an ominous problem. And it's this mental illness and behavioral health issue. Because number one, well, let me just tell you this story, because this is very informative. So I've gone into a lot of the shelter, these permanent supportive housing models that we have. We got Palmer Court. I've seen what they have in Ogden. I've seen what they have in St. George. But probably the most informative is here, because we have so many units. We got Palmer Court, we got Pamela's Place, we got the Magnolia, and there's a number of other now permanent supportive housing. And by the way, Magnolia costs $280,000 a unit. We will never, ever be able to house the people that we need to house at that cost. That will never happen. And so we have to get off of that idea. We can buy motels today and renovate them for about 150, maybe as low as $120,000 a unit. I think that's doable. That's probably the low cost situation. There's a tiny home concept out there. But this is what I found out in going into the permanent supportive housing. They talked about evicting people. And I said, well, wait a minute. You have evictions? Oh, yeah. Well, why you're evicted? What do they get evicted for? Very disruptive behavior. They end up just abandoning the house because they're so used to living on the street. There's a number of issues, but people do get evicted out of those housing situations. So they get evicted out of the housing situation. I go, well, what happens then? And well, they end up back on the street. That's exactly what happens. So what we've done essentially here is, because we're so successful in housing, that our data shows that 95% of the people we put in housing are still in the housing situation. So what that informs me now is that the people that are hardest to house and to deal with are the people that are living on the street. Because there isn't a person that lives on the street today that hasn't had the opportunity for housing. But it's been a cycle for them, because they'll get into it, they're disruptive, they don't do this or they don't do that, and then they're back out on the street. Where most of the people, lion's share of the people, get in and accept the housing, they're still living in poverty, and we need to address that. That just comes back to the whole mental illness and behavioral health. So governance. We got the state office now, and then we have what is a continuum of care organization, and there are three of them. There are 3 HUD designated continuum of care organizations, and Salt Lake County is one of them, which kind of makes it, at least we're not crossing county borders, which actually helps, I believe, in some way. So that's called the Coalition, Salt Lake Valley Coalition. Then we have Mountain Land COC, which is Utah, Summit, and Wasatch counties. And then the rest of the state is under what is called balance of state. And we have, as a state, put into policy creating what is called local homeless councils or coordinating councils. And that splits up the balance of state into smaller sections. So up in Mayor Caldwell's area, Weber and Morgan County are an LHC. And that local coordination is so critical, so critical. So we don't duplicate services and we spend those precious resources as economically as possible to tackle this huge problem that we face in our society. So, and let me just say that I have been now to almost all of the local homeless councils in the state. And I've found that the best model for a local homeless coordinating council is where the county takes the lead. Because, and I'm going to use Salt Lake, for example. Salt Lake County, hey, I live in Sandy. There's Draper, there's all these other places, West Jordan. You know, they're not, you know, they may have people that are panhandling or maybe setting camp along the Jordan River in the south end of the valley, but they don't experience the same homeless problem. And I live in Sandy, that Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake City, and Midville do because of the shelters and the facilities that are located there. It is an extreme burden on the public safety system. And that's why I feel like a broader government should be leading it out. And I'm going to use Weber County as an example of the way it should operate. And, you know, Mayor Caldwell, you can chime in, and I know it's not perfect, but at least we've got a county commissioner up there who is committed to try and coordinate these services because it's all hands on deck in the area. But I feel like cities like in, you know, the central city always seems to get the brunt of it because transportation is a big issue and services are a big issue. And so if I'm up in Cache County, you know, Hiram and Smithfield, you know, if somebody's going to, if they're homeless, chronically homeless especially, they're going to gravitate to Logan because that's where transportation, that's where services, that's where a lot of things are. And, you know, but it's not just Logan's problem. It's just not Ogden's problem. It's Roy, it's Riverdale, it's everybody's problem. And everybody at this point, I believe, needs to participate. And that's why the county should be the one to do this. There are counties where we have LHCs that don't want anything to do with it. And it falls to the city, the central city, then to step in because they're the ones being impacted the most by this issue. And so
Wayne, can I jump in really quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Our Lantern House has over 300 beds, and consistently more than 50% of the people that access those services aren't even from Weber County. They're from outside of Weber County, not just Ogden City, they're from outside of the county. So I agree that there needs to be a broader approach to addressing this. That's been a frustration for us for a long time when they just kind of dump it on Ogden because we're the central city and we have the resources, or the services. We don't have the resources necessarily, but that was eye-opening for us to know that 50% of the people that access our shelter are from outside of Weber County, not just Ogden City.
Yeah, and Salt Lake could probably say the same thing in South Salt Lake and Midvale and St. George. And there's probably no other, maybe Cedar City, because they get some just from I-15. But it's not to the degree that Ogden faces. Logan doesn't even face what you face. In fact, people from Logan, if they need shelter, guess where they are at? They are ending up at Lantern House or coming down to Salt Lake. Yeah, so not only do we have a local need to bring all communities together on this, but it's a whole state problem, from St. George to Logan, from Vernal to Tooele. And so that's kind of lays out what I've discovered, what the governance is. We can talk mitigation funds. Let me just tell you that I was in the middle of that discussion. Cameron knows that. He has a great narrative for that. And I see it a little bit differently today, but based on what I've experienced now, there are certain cities that are impacted much, much more than other cities are. And if I'm in those other cities, I would be happy to write out a check if that problem is not in my city. And I know that there's some angst about that, but that's the reality, folks. And I feel very strongly about that. So, but can we, because this is kind of funny, and I don't know all the nuances, even though I was right in the middle of it. But surprisingly, there's two parts of the mitigation fund. There's the municipal part, and then there's this grant part. And somehow Ogden and Salt Lake and St. George ends up in this grant part, and it's only Midvale and South Salt Lake are in the municipal part. And I think that was more of a carrot situation, and I don't necessarily quote me on this. I just don't remember what the issue was. But when you look at it today, it's Salt Lake, Ogden, Midvale, South Salt Lake, and St. George that probably ought to be getting funds from this municipal side also, not just the grant program, which doesn't get near the money. Although I think, what do you get $1 million out of that in Ogden? 700,000, something
We
like
did
that.
last year I think was 985, but it makes it difficult to budget because you don't know year over year what you're going to be getting and how you can forecast and plan for that.
So it's my commitment to you as the league to work with you to figure out what a better program would be for mitigation funds. But it's also my opinion that mitigation funds are necessary, because if you don't have the specially trained people to deal with the situation, if you're not dealing with that because you're not a central city, there's a proportionate share that you need to be paying into that. And I will work with Cameron or whoever you want me to work with, but I also want to engage the counties into this. UAC has to be a part of this. And I don't know how we incentivize counties that want to just let the central city deal with it, motivate them to be more engaged on a countywide basis to coordinate these services and coordinate the effort, because it's everybody's problem and everybody needs to participate. That's my narrative.
I have a question on the continuum of
Hold
care.
on, before you ask your question, Councilmember, Mayor Caldwell, we go back to you to look for questions in the room or online. So Councilmember Malkovich had a question, and then I can't see you online if anybody's raised their hands for questions or comments either.
No hands as of yet.
Okay, Mayor
Mary's
Caldwell.
got a hand up.
Okay, so Mayor Caldwell, you got Gary, you've got Councilmember Malkovich.
And Emily's got her hand up as well.
Okay, let's go in the room first. Yep.
All right, so you talked about continuum of care, and I think you said there were 3 in the state, and these have the LHCs, these 3 areas.
Okay, so let
And
me
where are those
clarify.
at? Because maybe
The
I'm
The
confusing
continuum of care in Salt Lake is really the LHC. So
Okay.
continuum of care organization is a federal designation by HUD. And so money funnels through from them directly to the CLCs,
Okay,
continuum of care. Now, what we've done as a state, because the balance of state, which is how many counties?
29?
25. Because Salt Lake's their own CLC,
Oh,
and Mountainland, Utah, Summit, and Wasatch are their own CLC. So that's 4 counties out. That leaves 25 counties in the state. And there's just no, I mean, Logan's different than St. George or Ogden. And so what we did in statute is create kind of mini CLCs within the balance of state. And that's like the Bear River, which is Box Elder, Cache, and Rich. Then there's Weber, Morgan, there's Washington, Iron County, then there's 6 counties kind of in central Utah. So that's where these different but that's a state designation.
the LHC state designation, CLC is federal
Yes.
designation. 3 of CLCs, but you're trying to have an LHC in every county?
13, right?
In the balance of state.
Okay,
So our office will be more of the administrative office for the balance of state. The sponsoring organization in Mountainland is it'll come to me in a minute. Sponsoring organization in Salt Lake County is Salt Lake County.
okay,
And then we're really here to administer the balance of state, but it's so different there. It really needs to function in your area. And that functioning organization is what we call the LHC.
okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And Councilmember, I can send you a lot of the work we did last summer that actually breaks this down visually from the
That would be
Government Policy Institute. Because one thing we discussed extensively last summer was whether there was a way to break up those federal designations. And ultimately there wasn't. That's why you see those local homelessness coordinating committees within the continuums of.
All right, thank you for sending that.
Mayor Caldwell?
Gary.
Thanks. Hey, Wayne, just a comment and a compliment. Thank you so much for, I think, the identifying the need to address root problems here, the mental health and the behavioral health. That is a much harder lift, but boy, I think you said a lot of things that resonate with me personally on that. The question I've got for you is, I think you correctly pointed out that homelessness really is everyone's problem. Its impacts happen to be felt in areas where they are more likely to get their needs met in these large metropolitan cities primarily. But as Mayor Mendenhall pointed out in her comments, even defining residency is complex. The homeless by definition, don't have a place of residence. So it's hard to say that they're from where they're from in the first place. You've identified counties as maybe the appropriate, at least at this point, the appropriate organizing or unit to sort of coordinate this. Because this really is a statewide problem, I'm curious about your feelings about why you don't feel maybe, or maybe you do, the state isn't maybe the more appropriate agency to handle this than a county by county basis. Just love your thoughts on that.
It comes down to the state is too big to deal with the nuances of local issues. But the state needs to be supportive. So that's our office, resources, that's budget, policy. But I wouldn't want to interfere. Let's take the Washington County LHC, or let's just take Weaver Morgan's. I wouldn't want to go up and interfere as a state on saying, well, you know, you need to do it this way, you need to do it this way, you need to do it this way. There's so many nuances. It's transportation, it's services. What are the nonprofits that are providing these services? Because all these services that we're talking about are administered by nonprofits. I don't know of any government entity that's actually performing those services. And so we fund those services as a state, as locals, as HUD, monies through the COC, monies through my office and out. It is so complicated. If I was king for a day, I could simplify this and it would be so much better. But I believe that the LHC is the perfect model, because local people get together and solve the local issues. The state's position now is to support that local council the best way that we can. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think a subset of that question is funding, and you know, why, if the state would consider statewide funding for this problem as opposed to regional funding. I'm thinking of Washington County as a good example, where really besides St. George, I don't think anybody else appreciates the problem that St. George is in, and finding local support from the local communities or even the county to raise enough funds to solve that problem is going to be challenging. And that may be every place, not just Washington County. Are there conversations about statewide funding as opposed to local funding? And really recognizing that at the end of the day, every taxpayer is going to have to share the burden, right? Regardless of where that comes from. Just your thoughts.
That's Mayor Randolph, St. George, but amen.
Yeah, I saw that.
Appreciating Gary Hill as the honorary St. Georgian.
Mayor Randall, and what's going on down there is awesome. Carol Hollowell is amazing how she does what she does in St. George, and they're very fortunate down there. But yes, we already have state funding for homeless services that we solicit grant applications. We spend, I think, about $40 million. But when we start to think about what the actual problem is and the root of that problem, this mental health and behavioral health issue, my guess it's going to take a lot more money. And that's where the state has to step up and help in this situation. There's no question about it. But, you know, it's going to be a partnership of local and state and federal effort. Hopefully at some point, when I get down the road a little ways, we can have the energy, you know, to maybe lobby Washington for some waivers or something. I don't know what they would even be at this time. As we figure out more how we can fund this, what we need to address the root problem. But I can also tell you this, that there isn't a person on the street today that's ever going to get to a position where they're going to be able to improve their behavioral and mental health without being in a stable housing situation. And that's not on the street or in the shelter. There's too much deep-rooted fear and anxiety that people are experiencing. It's amazing to me as I begin to scratch the surface of understanding how they feel and what they've experienced in their life. It's amazing. You know, I think we've done a lot better job than we did when I was in the legislature regarding veterans. I don't see as many veterans on the street as I used to. And I think that was part of this whole veterans thing that was a blow up federally for a while. And they've stepped up to the plate and focused on veterans. But I am told that 25% of our foster children come out of the foster care system and end up homeless. Now, I'm not sure that's the right number, but that's what I'm told. People have experienced intergenerational poverty, children that have been sexually abused in many other ways. You know, there's scars. And how are we going to deal with that as a society? I don't know. But I'm going to find out. And I'm going to try and figure this out with everybody's help. And so I see it as a partnership. All of us together, you know, spending local and state funds supporting accountable nonprofits in their efforts to serve the community. But I mean accountable, because there needs to be some outcomes from what we do. And there's some amazing outcomes today. But I feel like if we really focus on mental and behavioral health and really bring the resources of our communities on, because it's an individual basis. Everybody deals with something different. And really bring the resources and efforts to these individuals. I'm hoping we at least can get them into a better situation where they function better in society.
Can I chime in? I want to state that I am the most hopeful I've ever been about our potential to get at these root issues as a state and as local communities, for us to deal with the parts of the system that need to flow better and need more infrastructure, such as permanent supportive housing, and for our ability to deal with emergency shelter and the shelter resistant population. And that is because we're the most capable state in the United States of America to take these deep needs on at this time and get it done. And Wayne, you and you're in the position that you are in are the jewel on that. No pressure. And I know none of us are always going to agree on all of the facets of it, but we have you in this role. We have the data that is coming out of your work, and locally here, the coalition, that's giving us more clarity about exactly what is needed, what's working well, and what needs to be working better. And we have Arpa funding to, I think, stimulate some of the costs associated with not only the emergency components, but what we have to do from a housing system, or we're going to be right back in an emergency shelter need every single year, just as we have been for many, many years. So we're perfectly set, I think, as good as it can get. That's where the state of Utah is right now. And I appreciate your altruism in taking on, as was said at the beginning, this most difficult task, probably in all of government in the state of Utah. I think my job's hard, Wayne, but your job might be harder. So thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. We had Emily, then Jewel.
Oh, I was just gonna also say thank you. The phrase "the best view" comes after the hardest climb. So thank you for listening and your willingness to continue to listen to try to identify that acute and situational housing versus chronic and the root causes of it. So down here in Grand County, San Juan County, and Emery County are not all car camping and tent camping is recreational. And so when you talk about, how fast it takes to put up a tent, I can answer that question. And so what we have is a lot of hidden, whether it's acute and situational or chronic homelessness. We have a lot of hidden homelessness, and because we don't have public transportation, we do get caught in the winter trying, to do some emergency warming for resident, I guess we wouldn't say residents, but those who live here in Grand County especially. And some of them bounce to Colorado and some of them bounce down to Arizona for services. But at the same time, we do have a growing and I fear a larger uncounted acute and situational and both acute and situational and chronic homelessness here that's just very hidden. So I didn't hear you talk at all about the southeastern part of the state in your narrative. And I was just curious. I mean, we have a lot of nonprofits that are doing the heavy lift, and, a 501c3, the whole point is to reduce the burden of government. But I'm just curious your thoughts on this region, because they weren't part of the narrative that you shared.
Sorry to say that that's yet to be a place for me to visit. But I know just from our staff in the Office of Homeless Services, there are some unique situations there is no question, but we're all dealing with the same broad problems. And I will be down there in the next 60 days to Moab. I plan to go to San Juan. I'm yet to go to Vernal. I think those, and then the 6th county, that's Wayne, Paiute, I think Garfield, maybe Garfield's with Iron. There's still 3 other LHCs I still need to visit. And but we're well aware of what's going on there. I would like to see it firsthand. And so, yes, I will be there. Thank you, by the way. I have to just address Mayor Mendenhall's Jewel comment. It's a lump of coal right now.
At least there's good pressure.
But there's a lot of pressure, and hopefully that'll end up as more of it's fuel. So thank you.
Thanks, Jewel Allen.
Yeah, speaking of Jewel. So Wayne, thank you so much for sharing what you have been studying for this little while. I think a lot of us, we just see, we see it very superficially, and yet there's obviously so much depth that we could go into this issue. I was just wondering if there's a possibility, as you've shared some of your stories, it seems like it's the most effective when elected officials make it up close and personal, how it's affected them and what impact it's homelessness or seeing the effects of homelessness have made to them, without necessarily making homeless people, like invading their privacy. Is there a way that maybe there's more stories shared with just average citizens about people that are struggling with this? Because I think we have kind of a stereotype, or there's a fear of a homeless person and, fear for our safety, but we don't really get to know them and maybe understand better why they are homeless. Is that something that you've considered as a component of a public relations aspect for homelessness, just to make it more easy for cities to get behind what you're trying to do?
Yes, I have considered that, and having the governor actually maybe have a public information effort just to create a greater awareness. Having lived in Sandy, having been a policymaker, so I'd probably be a little bit more informed than most of my neighbors, just because I've been serving in the legislature. But the degree of what I didn't know shocks me. And so I think that I've compiled, that's probably a list of 12 things to tackle. But that is definitely one that we need to take a close look at. If we need to get money from the legislature, let's get it. And let's create a more informed society about, and this is not about classism. I'm the first person to admit that I was classist. Because you look down upon people in that situation. Just get a job, just this or just that. They do this or they do that. But we don't know and appreciate what someone in that position has experienced. Now, yes, bad choices have been made. I get all that. And we live in a culture of self-reliance. And yeah, I believe we can get people to self-reliance, but expecting that at this point, they are so far from even comprehending what self-reliance is. They're just we need to reach across, meet people where they're at, instead of this idea, let's reach down and lift them up. You're never going to get anywhere with people living on the streets. And I've now experienced that. They feel invisible. I spend almost every Friday night in Sugar House, where we offer a meal for the homeless people in the area. And some people might say I'm adding to the problem, but I don't feel like it is. I think what we're doing there is good, and I'm not the one initiating it, but I'm the one that's able to develop some relationships. And now I know a number of people there by name. We've had a lot of conversations, and I've been able to explore things with them, and I appreciate it so much better. And having that appreciation, I'm thinking the magnitude of this problem is going to take what I think maybe Mayor Mendenhall alluded to was the efforts of the volunteer nature of our state. But I would not recommend assigning somebody to go out and now be a friend to somebody that's chronically homeless without some significant training. Right. So that you would know what to do going into that situation. Be humble, listen, love, just show some care, some empathy. Don't get too anxious about helping them change their life. It will come naturally as you develop that relationship, and then you can start to have conversations about, well, let's get you into a better place or something like that. So I believe there's an untapped, huge resource that would help case management, because I guarantee we don't have the resources without volunteerism to address this on a broad level. We can focus on a few people, but on a broad level, it's going to take volunteerism.
One last question, real quick. You mentioned the foster care kids that, that age out. I know that we have quite a large unaccompanied minor homeless youth that are still attending schools. And with McKinney-Vento, the school districts are getting federal money, but a lot of kids don't want to be identified. So they're couch surfing, they're living wherever, and they're scrappy and they make it work.
Yeah.
But it comes down to some of that money is given to the schools, but it's really about a teacher who they feel comfortable with sharing that's their situation, and that teacher goes overboard in helping these youth. They have the greenhouse so that they get food. They figure out ways to get backpacks, they get burner phones, whatever, to help these kids. Again, those kids now will age out of our school system, and then they'll be adults without those services. So is that one of your silos of that you're looking at, not just the foster kids, but also these unaccompanied minors who are currently being nurtured by some caring teachers?
Unintentionally today, I didn't mention the educational aspect of this. Our education system is so critical to changing people's lives, giving opportunity, because there isn't a homeless person that a person who's experienced homelessness that I've talked to that relishes begging for something. The systems are hard to break through because they don't have transportation and,
phones, internet, computers.
Right, and all of that, or, they've gotten in trouble. So they've got this long list of warrants for their arrest or other criminal rap sheet. And so helping expunge some of those things that were more minor, or helping them deal with the warrants. When I was out with South Salt Lake Police, the police there, I'm sure anywhere, they can get on a computer with a judge, and someone that's experiencing homelessness can sit in the passenger seat of their vehicle. They can bring up the judge and get all their warrants taken care of right there. Because if you set up a time at the court for them, 99% of the time, they won't make it.
Thank you, everybody. Wayne, I wanna tell you again how much we appreciate your time. One little seed I'd like to plant with you that we've heard a lot from our law enforcement community is that JRI and JJRI, dumbing that down really gave less of an opportunity to create an intervention. They all say that they need to get clean first, and then they can start to access resources and everything else. These people are in a position where they can't pull themselves out of some of that. And when our law enforcement group got to give an intervention, they got clean for a little bit, then they would take access to resources. We have our drug court and justice court that would go to the jail and to the Lantern House while they're in a place where they can think reasonably and they're in a captive audience, and we would take care of those records, get them access to identification, and do a lot of those things that they weren't able to do while they were in their continual cycle of chronic homelessness and everything else. So that's a tool that I think that we haven't really leaned on, and we as a state can do better with, but that's just a seed for you to think about and to look at and to talk to people about. But again, we appreciate your time. I know everybody's got to get out of here. You've got LPC here in a little bit, but thank you for what you're doing. We really do appreciate your leadership. And I agree with Aaron, and that we as a state are better positioned than any other to address a really dynamic problem. So thank you for your time, energy, and for being with us today.
Thank you, Mayor. Our JRI has already been on my mind. We have to change that somehow to do exactly, but we're going to need a consolidated effort to do this. So the league's got to be involved, UAC, to make it happen.
Okay, thank you for that, Wayne. We really do appreciate you. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, first and second, all in favor?
See you at LPC in a few minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thank you very much.